The 1985 film The Breakfast Club opens with narration from Brian. He says, "You see us as you want to see us, in the simplest terms with the most convenient definitions. You see us as a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess, and a criminal." Over the course of the film, Brian, Andrew, Allison, Claire, and John get to know each other, share their lives together, trade war stories, and become friends. They too initially saw each other as the labels that others applied to them. Brian is a brain, a nerd who gets good grades, rarely misbehaves, is unpopular, and romantically inept. But he is also vulnerable and completely prepared to rebel in the most shocking way. Andrew is an athlete, a jock, but he actually hates being on the wrestling team and only does it due to the insistence of his father. He has bullied someone, but he deeply regrets this and wants to change. Allison is a basket case, but her behavior can be seen as rooted in the neglect of her parents who ignore her. Claire is a princess, but is willing to defy the assistant principal and even date a criminal. And John is that criminal, but he's also loyal to his friends and willing to take the hit when it looks like the group might be caught and punished. The members of the eponymous Breakfast Club are archetypes, but not completely stereotyped. That is the point of the film, even if those words are not used. So what's the difference? Archetype as a term has been around for centuries. It means the original version from which copies are made, the original pattern. When creating literary characters, an archetype is the model from which the character is created. From the starting point of an archetype, the writer builds an individual character. Archetypes are not just characters, but situations and settings, usually to symbolize something greater than itself. Situational archetypes include the battle between good and evil, the journey, and so forth. The Breakfast Club's situational archetype is arguably the initiation. This is generally some form of growth into adult life, new maturity, or new awareness. Archetypal settings include the ocean, which symbolizes life, the island, which symbolizes isolation, and so on. The Breakfast Club's archetypal setting is the small town, a place where everyone both knows and judges each other. It symbolizes some form of intolerance. The character archetypes in the film are outright said in the opening narration and then repeated in the closing narration, but these modern high school labels are actually forms of older archetypes. John is the bully, someone who is included in the story to intimidate others. Claire is the damsel in distress, included for the hero to rescue her. Andrew is that archetypal hero, physically strong and popular. Allison is the outcast, the wanderer. Brian is the dreamer, unsatisfied with his life. But in order to connect with these characters and make both the situation and setting engaging and real, all archetypes must deviate from the original to subvert the expectations of the audience. The situational archetype is the initiation, but where it diverts is the young people initiate each other rather than be initiated by some adult figure. The adult figure in the film gives them a task to complete, an essay about who they think they are, but it's in this rejection of this essay that they grow. The setting is the small town in which everyone is judged, but we witness very few characters in the film, and we're trapped in one corner of this town rather than explore it. And each character deviates from their archetype. Stereotypes are different. A stereotyped character takes a general type of person and oversimplifies their qualities into predictable or cliched types. One could argue that if an archetypal character contains too many of these stereotypes, or if the archetype rarely deviates in any meaningful way, then the character becomes a living, breathing stereotype. Feel free to say, "It's more complicated than that, and the terms archetype and stereotype actually have a lot of overlap," in the comments, as if I don't know. Both archetype and stereotype draw from a type of person, but the difference is that the archetype will use the original version, the template, as a starting point, and a stereotype uses it as the end point. Brian is a nerd and contains stereotypical nerd qualities. He's a member of the physics club, he's shy, he's a virgin, etc. But it's in his deviations from his archetype that we come to identify with, sympathize with, and accept Brian as a character and person instead of a series of stereotypes fitting neatly into a blank archetype. When Brian writes his essay, he's more or less saying the same thing, except he is referring to how we view real people instead of how we write good characters. Assistant Principal Vernon sees the teenagers as stereotypes rather than fleshed out people. He berates John for being a garden variety stereotypical criminal who won't amount to anything because he has seen John's type before. John is not a person to Vernon, he is a type. Vernon sees Andrew as an athlete, a jock. We know this because when John takes the screw out of the door, Vernon enlists Andrew to help keep the door open. Assistant Principal Vernon sees Andrew the way others see him, a strong body. Athletes are given hero status in high schools, and because of that, Vernon expects more from Andrew and is willing to enlist him to help him with the door. He's strong, he's part of the school community, he will help, he is a good guy. John is a bad guy. Vernon accepts Brian more than he accepts John because Brian is a good student and therefore a good guy to Vernon, but Vernon still speaks to Brian with no respect because he too has been brainwashed, as the movie puts it, into believing Brian is not worthy of being loved, being popular. He's a brain. Vernon says almost nothing to Allison throughout the course of the film. She is ignored by Vernon the same way that she is ignored by her parents and ignored by the school. Vernon sees the teenagers' stereotypes as the end point of who they are, rather than their archetypes as the beginning point to explaining the greater details of who they are. Again, that's the point of the movie, that we see real people as templates comprised primarily or even exclusively of stereotypes. Movies use a lot of shorthand with characters due to a combination of its runtime, about 2 hours, and what it perceives about the movie's intended audience. The more time we spend with a character, the greater the opportunity for that character to show us who they really are, deviate from the archetype, shatter stereotypes, and become more than a simple copy of the original. When movies present characters as more stereotype than person, or use harmful stereotypes about a group of people, that can reinforce pre-existing ideas in the minds of the audience about the group of people, especially if that audience has limited real-life interactions with said group. That's not to say that The Breakfast Club is somehow unproblematic in this regard. It does not even attempt anything resembling diversity. Also, the ending in which Allison is made acceptable to Andrew paddles against the current in terms of the themes that the film is seemingly trying to address. Archetypal characters usually have a flaw to overcome, and sometimes who they become after this character arc is how they deviate from that archetype. But characters who are nothing but a barrel of stereotypes usually have to overcome an unrelated flaw while maintaining their tired or even harmful stereotypes. Audiences expect readily identifiable traits so that characters can be understood quickly within the span of a 2-hour film, and the limitations of the medium force certain unrealistic character archetypes and stereotypes on us. A human being is many things: an introvert who longs for human contact, an emotional mess who mocks the irrationality of others, and so forth. In a real person, this would not be considered inconsistent, as these traits exist within all of us, but if a character in a movie is written this way, it feels different. If the inconsistency is what they must overcome, or is highlighted by the film, it's fine, but if it's not, it feels unsatisfying and even confusing. The medium insists upon characters that fit archetypes not only because of the ease in which to write these characters, but because we insist upon it, too. Works of fiction are not designed to have one-to-one fiction-to-real-world realism. They are designed to tell stories and make symbolic points and things like that, and that's fine, but we need to be aware of what we're seeing when we're seeing it, so that we don't confuse archetypal characters with how walking, talking human beings are, or confuse stereotypes depicted in films with the manner in which groups actually behave. Unlearning these stereotypes actually takes time and effort. It's not something that people simply grow out of. If anything, it becomes more difficult to unlearn these stereotypes as we get older, more set in our ways, and more likely to dismiss nuanced views of groups as products of naive younger people. This shorthand is necessary for fiction. It is unnecessary for real life. Hi everyone, I hope you liked the latest episode. Please click on the Patreon link if you want to support the show, and make sure to click subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you never miss an episode. I'll see you next week.